And here we are, the last full Fox season. Yes, there would be 3 episodes that would air on Fox after the season: Blog Snart, A Love Story, Roger Raises the Bar, and A Boy Named Michael, all ironically Roger episodes, but I'm choosing to include them in the TBS era for a number of reasons that will be abundantly clear when we look at the first season as a whole. Season 9, much like Season 8, is a grab bag of quality. Some episodes are great, some are bad, and some are wildly experimental and thrive because of it. It's just so surreal to come to the end of a generation. Season 9 ended in 2014, and with it the idea of American Dad needing to appeal to a broader broadcast TV audience. We've seen cracks in that facade so far with some of the experimental episodes, but it won't become more evident and pronounced until we take a look at, honestly, probably Season 11. It's just night and day how different the two eras of American Dad are. And looking back at Season 9 in hindsight, it does make sense how we got here. So without further ado, what worked, what failed, and what straddled the line here in Season 9. Steve and Snot are bullied nerds. They get beat up and decide they should just clone themselves dates. Their clones come out as kids. They then raise the kids they wanted to eventually take to the dance and get lucky with. There is no B story. This is all the episode is. This is the whole episode. I hate this episode. I think it's genuinely one of the worst of the whole series. Like, ha ha ha, Snot and Steve are parents now and understand the importance of letting your kids leave the nest. But like, okay? They stole someone's DNA, cloned it, raised these kids because they thought they'd be able to date them, and then it backfires. And then Snot goes off and runs off with them and Steve has to stop him. Like, I'm glad this is the season premiere. I'm glad this is where it all starts, because we're getting the worst, and I mean the absolute worst episode out of the gate already. Like, in no uncertain terms, this is the worst episode of the season. It's Weird Science gone horribly, horribly wrong. It's just not good. It's maybe a 4 out of 10, and even that I feel is generous. And that's looking at this in a broad scope. There's just... Like, yes, Season 9, the animation looks fantastic. There's a ton of really good jokes throughout the season, but in this one, it's just empty. It's hollow, which is weird because Steve-dedicated episodes like Escape to Pearl Bailey are usually pretty strong. So to have this is just... They're again hoping you really like Steve and Snot, because if you don't, this episode drags, and I've never been a huge Snot fan, so it's just dragging me all the way to the end until I'm just a torso and no thank you. Francine is unsatisfied in bed, and Stan is super cocky about his lovemaking capabilities. This is a season, folks. Strap in. As Francine starts to get pent up and buries her resentment, it takes on the form of a violent specter. A... poltergasm. The house gets haunted and starts to fall apart, with Roger trying to help Stan understand that he's the problem and he needs to better satisfy his wife. You know, there's a B story to this episode. There wasn't to the last one. Really kind of helps break the episode up, make it feel like it has natural segments. And you want to know the funny part? This B story, if I explain it, sounds horrible, and yet it might be one of the funniest of the entire series. Klaus is off to Atlantic City to go see a motivational workshop. He gets to his room, asks the bellhop put the do not disturb sign on his door, turns on the hotel directory, and then throws out his back, trapped with the same ads playing on a loop over and over and over again. Poltergasm is admittedly really fine. It's solid for what it is. Compared to the last episode, it's night and day. Roger's persona is Ruby Zeldestein, which, fun fact, is a play on Zelda Rubinstein, the actual actress that played the psychic in The Poltergeist. Like, there's those small touches that make the episode feel thought out. And every time we cut to Klaus losing his mind more and more, just the absolute absurdity of the scene makes the episode that much more fun. Poltergasm is a respectable 8 out of 10. Do you know what the difference between a government bond and a man? Alone matures. Benji! Steve desperately wants to prove he's a man to his dad to go on the big CIA hunting trip. When he does manage to convince him to go, he takes out a deer and begins to feel remorse as everyone celebrates him. He then takes their 2 children and raises them as his own to get revenge on the CIA for their barbaric, yet sophisticated hunting practices. Remember seasons ago when I talked about the magic of American Dad? How the A story would be something totally ludicrous and the B story was usually something more sensible with an exaggerated twist, and how I'd keep bringing it up in an almost repetitive way? Take the last episode, for example. A story, a poltergasm that's destroying the home. The B story, Klaus throwing out his back and going insane. Buck Wild, Steve raises vengeance deer and proves he's a man. The B story, Klaus and Roger begin a cross-country drive in a 93 Sable to see the odometer turn over at 100,000. They get fat off of junk food and struggle to see such a momentous occasion. And you know what? You know what the worst part is? It's hilarious. It is genuinely a bona fide great episode. The A story handles Steve and Stan great. The B story is a brilliant Roger and Klaus adventure. There is a lot to love, and it's one of Steve's strongest episodes where you understand his motivations and he really comes into his own. Buck Wild is terrific and a well-executed 9.5 out of 10. Just the turning of the odometer alone is hysterical to me. It's just so simple, but all the extreme turns sell it more and more. I don't know, there's a magic in seeing a fat alien push a car while a German fish cheers him on. Francine feels like Steve is growing distant from her and wants to bond with him over gardening. But when he gets caught shoplifting, she decides to teach him the tools of the trade and he quickly becomes her star protege. The B story follows Stan after stepping on a rake and having it slam into his Huevo Rancheros, having a super high voice which is super convenient, as Roger, Klaus, and Haley have started up a Russian balalakia trio and are missing a singer. Stan begins to sing, Steve and Francine begin to steal, and the musical culture of Tsarist Russia was preserved for 23 minutes. Eventually, Steve does get caught again and shipped off to a worker camp for other shoplifters, and is trapped while Francine has to go and get him back. The neat thing is, it's just Francine using her skills and not having Stan involved at all. Much like My Morning Straitjacket, where you saw that her old party skills, or her old, in this case, smuggling skills, come in handy time and time again. Like in this episode, Francine is very capable, and it shows she's more clever than people think she is. It's also just a great Francine and Steve episode, like we saw in Spelling Bee My Baby. The characters work really, really well together, again thanks to Kristen Schaal and Scott Grimes' absolute talent. And it is very nice to see that she is more capable, even if she forgot Matilda. Crashwalkers is a very hearty and entertaining 9 out of 10, and it's just nice to see that meta-comedy shining through. The lingering shots for comedic effect, the more absurd ideas treated as totally normal. I don't know, I'm feeling nostalgic as we close out this era, like a journey coming to an end. Mariah Carey is in another episode. Why? Is she just the biggest American Dad fan or something? I have so many questions. Anyway, it's another Thanksgiving episode that is admittedly much better than There Will Be Bad Blood. Stan is upset when Francine invites her family to Thanksgiving and he doesn't get to lay around and do nothing, and feels like he's steadily being pushed out of his own home. The B story has Mama trying to set Haley up with a Chinese bachelor who she secretly is crushing on. Stan eventually ends up at a football game where he breaks bread with fans of a rival team and realizes the holiday is just about spending time with your family, which, yeah, duh. Moving on. It's a Thanksgiving episode. It makes There Will Be Bad Blood look like an episode of Border Town in comparison. Maybe I'll talk about Border Town one day. Maybe I'll just let it sit on the trash heap of history. But I'll never forget those Santa Ana winds. Is Kung Pao Turkey the best episode of the season? No, absolutely not. But it's not complacent, and it's nice to see Mama and Baba after so long. The jokes are well executed, and ultimately it's still a very respectable 8 out of 10. But yeah, Mariah Carey is in the show again as Laura. Like, okay, when Forrest Whitaker was on, he played Agent Turlington, and it was just the same character. But she's been in like 3 or 4 episodes as completely different characters. I don't get it. She's like Will Forte, or Nick Kroll, or frickin' Chris Diamantopoulos, and I'm pretty sure I butchered his name. It's just, I have questions that I know I'll never have answers to. But, like, why is someone that is so big, so frequently on the show? I wish I knew. It's not even the first time or the last time we have big voice actors and big stars in the show. It just baffles me that people don't talk about this. I mean, there's a season in the TBS era where The Weeknd comes on and he's the joke. They spend 23 minutes just making fun of The Weeknd, and it's amazing. This show needs more attention. This show needs more love. What other show has Mariah Carey in like 3 different episodes as a completely different character? What's going on here? Snot's dad dies, and so Steve and the boys decide to make an independent movie about grief as they travel cross-country with a sepia filter to help Snot get to the funeral. The V story is very, very brief and really only shows up at the beginning and the end of the episode, but it follows Stan and Roger working with Hideki, Toshi's dad, yet again, as he teaches them to trust their guts. Whenever their guts rumble, they have to act on the impulse it's telling them to do. Snot doesn't really want to deal with everything he's going through, how Steve tries to frame it as a movie, and Steve finds himself falling for a manic pixie dream girl voiced by Zooey Deschanel, which is so on the nose it hurts and shows they understood the assignment. Her performance is outstanding, and she definitely knows how to play that type. Stan, Roger, and Hideki come up with a cake cutter, make a fortune, and then turn on each other in the end. I think this is a much better Hideki B story than the last one. It may end in roughly the same place, but I don't know, I feel like it's handled better. The A story with the independent movie bits, however, is really, really great and has all kinds of really deep cut jokes about the genre as a whole. They don't pick one movie in particular. This is a jarring criticism of the whole thing, and I think that's because they didn't pigeonhole themselves and they have a lot more ground to work with because of it. The slight nuances, the metaphors, the deep undertones, and the rich indie soundtrack just make this feel so much more aware than, say, we make fun of 500 Days of Summer, aren't we creative? Like, independent movie understands what makes those movies so laughable. It's like they understand film criticism and are critiquing it in their own way. Independent Movie is a solid 9 out of 10 episode that shows the writers still know very much what they're doing. They haven't lost the thread on the characters, and honestly, it gets the taste of Steve and Snot's testubular adventure out of your mouth. Independent Movie is phenomenal, and you should give it a watch, especially if you have any interest in film criticism whatsoever. It's so nuanced, it has such a great weight to it. Like, it might very well be one of my favorite episodes of the entire season. Haley wants to hang out with her friends at the club, but doesn't have a good fake ID. Steve can make incredible fake IDs. They work together to make and distribute fake IDs while Stan tries to hunt them down to figure out who's trafficking these fake IDs around town, and they find out they're in direct competition with one of Roger's personas, Kevin Ramage. There is no B story, but there's a lot of moving pieces to the main story, and I think that's what makes this episode so strong. It builds a very solid Haley and Steve episode, which we genuinely don't have a ton of, much less an episode where the two actually bond and develop as characters. We will get more of this in the TBS era, but it is nice to see these one-off episodes here and there during the Fox period. It also introduces not one, but two antagonists in Roger as Kevin Ramage, and Stan, who, while he has no idea it's actually Haley and Steve, is just doing his job to hunt down Gutenberg. It even has Nancy Cartwright making a brief cameo as Bart Simpson for just a single one-off joke. Faking Bad is a really solid episode that sets a solid pace and maintains it all the way to the end. It's something that I would call a perfect 10 out of 10 episode, with just how multifaceted it is and how it handles each of those elements in the air so well. It paints each character so vividly that you walk away remembering these major segments of the episode. It's easily one of, if not one of the strongest examples of Season 9 in its entirety. Faking Bad is an excellent 10 out of 10. It's a Christmas musical episode! When Steve starts acting up and showing he's a bad boy for Christmas, the Krampus comes to punish him after being released by Stan from the copper pot Jack stored in Stan's basement. The Krampus initially being played by Danny Glover. The B story is Haley getting a job so she can buy the perfect Christmas gift for her family, a tub of popcorn. Krampus takes Steve hostage until Stan brings Jack to him. Krampus' singing voice is actually the late great Charles Bradley, and I mean, I wouldn't mention it if he wasn't just such a great inclusion. I mean, each song is brilliant. When Jack runs off, Stan has Roger take him to the North Pole to try and convince Santa to help him find Krampus. This Santa being the same one they fought in For Whom the Sleigh Bell Tolls, and continues that narrative. Santa eventually agrees to help Stan if he helps him take out Krampus. Meanwhile, Steve finds out that Krampus actually cares about the kids he punishes and just doesn't want them to ruin their lives by misbehaving, all through a brilliant duet between Charles Bradley and Scott Grimes. I mean, it's smooth like butter, and it kind of upsets me that other shows don't make this kind of quality. It's really funny how passionate Haley is about working for the airport to get the family literally just a tub of popcorn. After Steve and Krampus make up, Stan and Santa raid the castle while Jack has a change of heart and goes to save Steve. And as Krampus lays dead at the feet of Santa, Jack becomes the new Krampus, which will be a new normal for the series. Minstrel Krampus is a 10 out of 10 and one of the best Christmas episodes American Dad has ever had. Between incredible songs, great jokes, and just a wonderful Christmas story and vibe that builds on the older episodes. This episode is amazing, and I can't believe I'm saying this. It could very well be the best episode of the whole season. There's just so much to love. Merry Christmas, everybody! And I know I keep mentioning it, like I keep saying this might be the best episode of the season, but that just goes to show how high the quality of Season 9 truly is. There's so many great episodes that, yes, there are some duds, and yes, you can see why overall public appeal had been down for some time, but it doesn't mean the quality of the show had gone down. If anything, it had outgrown its boots, it had outgrown its term on Fox. When Roger gets in a car crash at a red light because he was framing the perfect shot, he gets concussed, and when he comes to, he's able to see into the future. The family takes a trip to the safety museum, and when he guides them all to safety after it catches fire, the family begins to be dependent on his visions to know that everything is going to be okay, even going so far as to not leave the house unless he's around, to the point that Steve forgets language. It's a very easy episode to explain, but like some of the best episodes of the series, that does not mean it's bad at all. Oh no! Vision Impossible is an easy 10 out of 10 because of all the jokes just absolutely encasing this admittedly simple plot. We get the return of Mind Quad, a great merging of Haley rescuing a baby raccoon and Steve getting a Bowflex, and a ton of protein powder. The safety museum is like a 4-minute long gag that just keeps working the more they focus on it. And it's just, the dialogue is the sharpest it's ever been. You get, again, that absurdist idea, and there's not even a B story to it. It's just this almost comedic take on what could be a Twilight Zone episode. You know, man gets the ability to see into the future, everyone becomes dependent on him, but it's done in a very comical take, and again, they're not addressing it as a Twilight Zone episode. They're not calling attention to it. They're just treating it as a normal thing that can happen to Roger if he gets concussed when he's hit by a car. And just the subversion of those expectations at the safety museum, the evolution of the characters going forward, is just, Vision Impossible is super, super strong, and it's really just a solid example of what happens when American Dad is at its strongest. The family decides to take a trip to Familyland, but Francine is upset when everyone splits up to do their own things. However, her tears trigger Roy Family to be brought back to life, and he traps all the families inside Familyland. Stan trapped in Wild West Land, Steve in Cartoon Land, Roger in Spaceland, etc., etc. Haley in Princess Land, like the only one I didn't mention was Haley, and I'm in too deep to not include her, so yeah, excuse the etc., etc. I will refer to all of them and their locations. And then Francine makes cookies, the sun travels through the vents, and everyone wants to come back together and love each other as a family again. It's a fine episode. I like the different lands, and Patrick Stewart is great in this as Bullock, who has a kink for families having a good time, which is just bizarre enough to work. But the Roy family bits do go on for a little bit too long, and I believe that's Mike Hentelman that's playing Roy family, and he's an excellent voice actor, but every time I hear him, I think of, again, Border Town and Family Guy, two shows that he worked on pretty heavily. And so it's just, it almost feels like a downgrade. Again, it's not. It feels like it, but it isn't. The jokes are still there. The comedy is still sharp. It's just, overall, Familyland almost feels more like a Family Guy episode that got reskinned for American Dad than the other way around. It's tolerable. It's a very comfortable 8 out of 10. Stan achieves his 100th kill. Man, we've come a long way from the 42-year-old virgin. Anyway, Stan goes to sleep and begins sleepwalking and helping out and doing good to make up for being a bringer of death. It's another Dr. Penguin episode, by the way. Stan continues to sleepwalk and takes over an orphanage before his night self starts drugging his coffee to keep him asleep so he can keep on doing good deeds. Stan begins to grapple with the sleep self and all the good it's doing, eventually learning that he should be nicer and eventually has to be reconditioned to be able to take a life again for the good of his family. He finally makes peace with his conscience. I'd say the episode is better than Familyland and works as just a Stan episode. There's no real B-story or any antagonist other than the just classic Stan versus Stan, man versus self argument. He's literally struggling with his own conscience, and I think the writers handled that wonderfully. It's much in the same vein as National Treasure, Franny and the Well, where we take an episode to really highlight something that can be kind of dark and unsettling on other characters, but presented in the world of American Dad is very suiting. Here, Stan is grappling with the fact that he needs to kill. He needs to take away life. Something that you wouldn't get with, Cleveland, the cable installer, or Peter, the brewery worker. Stan has a very real moral crisis, and here his mind is fighting against him. And I think that's something that's really neat and something that should be explored more. Cock of the Sleepwalk is an excellently done and fantastic 9 out of 10. While on a trip, Stan and Francine fall in love with the adventures of their stewardesses and become stewardesses themselves to follow along on their escapades, each of the girls having their own talents as they team up to stop Mark Cuban. Actually played by Mark Cuban, who's trying to blow up the sun. The B story has Roger swapping faces with Steve so he can romance a girl for him, but he doesn't trade back with Steve until he's done with her and has had his fun, and she admits that Figgis isn't really working out for them. I feel like this episode would have been better if it was just the Naughty Stewardess' story. Like, they all have these characters, and we've had 3 episodes in a row that didn't have a single B story to them. Why do one now and have it just be this really awkward Steve and Roger one? It hurts to say, but this is one of those rare occurrences where a Steve and Roger B story brings the episode as a whole down. The Flippity Flop was great almost solely because of the Steve and Roger Jim story, and now it just feels so weird and jarring. I don't know. It brings down what otherwise would have been a 10 out of 10 episode just from the absurdity of it alone. Unfortunately, despite the Naughty Stewardesses fighting their way through, the episode is a 7, maybe an 8 at best. And that's not to say the Naughty Stewardess part isn't funny, and it doesn't even feel, it feels like an intentional backdoor pilot. For those of you that don't know, backdoor pilots are when they insert pilots of other shows into more successful shows as a hope to sort of catapult them into their own interests. Like, you have an idea for a hospital show, so you include the hospital in a cop show, and then it gets its own spin-off, much like the Chicago Fire PD and Medical, as well as some of the Grey's Anatomy spin-offs. The Naughty Stewardesses feels very much as an intentional back-end pilot to a show that would never exist, an homage to those attractive female spies of the 70s and 80s eras. And the fact that they actually got Mark Cuban, billionaire and Shark Tank member, to come on the show is just, again, baffling. Like, people keep bashing American Dad over and over again, but it has one of the most star-studded rosters of the 3. Like, I just, it's wild to me. And American Dad, honestly, don't skip this episode. The Naughty Stewardess part is still worth watching the Roger and Steve elements. It's just like, even at their absolute worst in these episodes, there's still something to walk away with and appreciate in American Dad. Stan thinks Steve and the boys are too soft and sheltered, so he sets them up in the holodeck at the CIA to survive the elements. However, their technical know-how allows them to manipulate the system and trap him in it instead. The B story has Haley buying the star of Roger's home system and declares herself his leader since she now rules an entire galaxy, all to show that Roger can care about something. Anyway, after Steve decides to turn the tide on Stan after taking over the holodeck, the system backfires and they have to work together to stop it. Stan and Steve bond over beating the zombie monster, and he realizes Steve can handle himself more than he previously thought. You've seen the episode premise before, but I gotta admit, I enjoyed how unique it felt. Steve never meant to hurt his dad, just scare him, and that new respect between the two feels earned. It also allows Steve to see what his father went through, to see what hardened him so much and why he keeps judging him for being the soft little nerd boy that everybody else loves. It's much in that same vein of Man in the Moon Bounds, where Stan doesn't want Steve to get hurt. Everything he's doing is making sure that he's prepared. He doesn't want him bullied like he was. He doesn't want him to feel neglected or defeated. He wants Steve to be able to stand on his own 2 feet like he was forced to due to the absence of Jack. It's really kind of, there's a lot of heart behind it. It's not vindictive, it's not violent, it's not, manipulative for the sake of being manipulative. Stan does mean well. It's a humanizing episode for both of them while also showcasing a ton of great jokes both in the A and B stories. I Ain't No Holodeck Boy is a solid 9.5 out of 10. Stan takes a pill to try and be able to listen to Francine. However, it backfires, and instead of being able to understand her, he becomes a woman. Meanwhile, Roger and Klaus decide to go into business together and decide to sell Stan suits that he won't need anymore, and that's it. That's the whole episode. I don't know. Stan Goes on the Pill just never really worked for me. It's not that it's bad, if anything, it's a personal take. The jokes are still super sharp and it's formatted well, it just doesn't feel like it goes any deeper. It just feels very surface level compared to everything else we've gotten this season. And I don't know, I think comparing it to I Ain't No Holodeck Boy, it's just kind of there. It doesn't feel like Stan and Francine's relationship is elevated at all by him taking the pill, and it's just them sort of readjusting to this new normal. And of course, the kids being roped into it. It's just, I don't know, it's weird because it's sandwiched between 2 really, really solid episodes, and just the pill episode doesn't seem to work. I don't know, for me personally, it's like a 6 out of 10, but if you enjoy it, I'm sure there's plenty of reasons to justify that, and I respect that entirely. It's not, Stan's best friend. It's not Deacon Stan Jesus Man. It's just, personally, I can't stand it. Personally, I can't stand Snot. That's a me thing. That's a me problem. Now, episodes like Jenny from the Block make me forget that because it's just a perfect episode, but it's just playing with this element of Stan being almost feminized, much like we saw in Helping Handies, I believe it was. It just, I don't know, it doesn't, they don't go all the way with it. They don't commit, and I think that's what makes it a problem for me. If they had gone harder into it, if they had pivoted harder and made it more absurd, I think it would have done a lot better. Stan goes undercover at an Occupy rally, and after Haley gives him intentionally bad advice to blend in with the young crowd, he gets taken hostage and she believes reprogrammed when he starts giving to charities and helping out otherwise liberal activities. Meanwhile, Roger bought entirely too many remembrance candles and didn't sell them all, so he has to find a use for all these candles he'd never use again. He and Steve begin to relax in the candlelit attic, and they become quickly enchanted by the flame. Haley tries to get her dad back to normal, and he reveals he's been in super deep cover as the whole scheme was a way for the CIA to test new missile defense systems. Honey, I'm Homeland is a wonderful Stan and Haley episode that keeps building and going deeper with its ideas, rather than Stan Goes on the Pill, where it was very, very surface level. You see Haley trying to sabotage her dad, loving him, wanting her old dad back, and even trying to take out his kidnappers later on. You see Haley again understanding that her dad is the way he is because of everything he's gone through, and she understands that he needs to be that sometimes. Much in that same vein as Holodeck Boy, this is a Stan and Haley understanding each other episode. This is a way for their bond to deepen. Throughout the series, we've seen Stan come to peace with who Haley is and love her for who she is. And now it's sort of the same with Haley loving Stan, and we get even more of that later on in this season with She Will Survive, but Honey, I'm Homeland is an excellent example of it. Like, it's so refreshing to see a cartoon family that loves one another, akin to Bob's Burgers. Again, they love each other, they have no problem messing with one another, and they will absolutely be the antagonists of each other's stories, but at the end of the day, they do come together, they do protect one another. And I mean, the episode is a 9.5 out of 10 overall, with fantastic performances by Adam Devine, Phil Lamar, and Kathryn Hahn. When Stan isn't in the inner circle, he gets upset and tells Haley to get a job so she can pay rent. She becomes a bartender at Roger's place, where Bullock regularly visits, and starts feeding her info that Stan uses to weasel his way into Bullock's inner circle. Klaus tries to show Snot and Steve Das Boot, but when they hadn't heard of German folktales, and yeah, it's a whole rabbit hole. It's really funny that the Klaus bit starts to spiral, but does get a little overdone in parts. Haley starts to slip and begins to drink on the job, and while Stan feels guilty, he keeps pushing her to get more and more information from Bullock. Eventually, they get chased down for knowing highly confidential secrets, and Haley is able to threaten Bullock to save their lives, showing Stan she can care for herself. And it's literally just the same message as the end of Holodeck Boy. Like, Honey, I'm Homeland is the way stronger Stan and Haley episode, and it was right before this. If you watch She Will Survive in a vacuum, it's an okay episode though. And it's not to say that She Will Survive is bad at all, it's just Honey, I'm Homeland feels much more Haley learning to understand her father, and Stan understanding Haley is much more in the vein of She Will Survive, which we've seen it done better, and honestly, the B story is what detracts from it the most. It's overplayed. The other art style of the German folktales works once or twice, but when you get 3 or 4 times in, obviously Steve and Snot are just completely exacerbated by this, and it just doesn't go anywhere. It just goes on way too long for my personal taste. I'm not going to call the episode bad, because I'm sure there's someone out there that loves how Klaus goes on these tangents, but overall, the episode is like an 8 out of 10. What an episode. Stan rubbernecks. He gets caught by Francine rubbernecking and checking women out from the corner of his eye on the sly. We also get McGee for the first time, who will be a recurring character later on in the series. The B story has Roger and Klaus sharing a glass of wine on the family's new couch and spilling some, so they try and hide it. Stan rubbernecks while driving and gets into an accident and tries to hide his rubbernecking ways. The family's insurance agent is played by Terry Crews and would pop up later on in the series as well. The agent is hot on Stan's trail, determined to make sure he figured out what really happened. But when they find his phone, they realize he's been rubbernecking. Is this episode technically another musical? There's like 3 or 4 songs in the episode, but they're all very solid. It almost feels like a stealth musical, and not in that weird Bob's Burgers Great North kind of way, where the song is just kind of shoehorned in there because why not? It'll go great on the album and make people go, oh yeah, I remember that episode. That's the one with the moose. Rubberneckers, I feel, is a divisive episode. You're either gonna really love it or really hate it, and there's not much in between. I personally enjoy how off-the-wall Rubberneckers is, and the musical numbers, especially the insurance one, get me every time. Just again, the creativity we see in this show is second to none, and for me, Rubberneckers is at least a solid 8 out of 10 that knows to not outstay its welcome. No song goes on for too long, no joke is run for too long, and honestly, it's such an exaggeration of events for an otherwise harmless thing. Rubberneckers is an excellent episode that you should definitely check out. Steve gets a job at a grocery store, and when Stan gets fired, he ends up working under Steve and realizes that he shouldn't have been so harsh about doing things the right way after trying to wreck his permanent record. The B story has Roger trying to beat a hipster guitarist at a playoff. Fun fact, the hipster guitarist is played by Robin Thicke, and his dad, Alan Thicke, also has a guest role. Not to mention Cedric Yarborough and Stanley Tucci both have guest appearances. And I love me some Tucci. Anyway, yeah, it's just kind of there. I've seen this episode like 5 times and could not tell you what happens in the episode other than the guitar contest. Like, it's such a vapid episode, personally. It does nothing. It's the null rod of American Dad episodes. Like, as far as Steve and Stan relationships go, again, you had Holodeck Boy not 3 episodes prior, and then you give us this? This is nothing. This does nothing. This is fahui. It's just, I can't, I don't know. It's not as bad as Snot and Steve's Testuvier Adventure or anything like that. Like, it's inoffensively fine. It's so middling, it's okay. It's an episode you've seen before, even if you know you haven't. And if you spun around and put on the spot to describe it, you can't. It's maybe like a 5 or a 6 out of 10 if I'm being absolutely generous. Permanent Record Wrecker is the episode you fall asleep to. It's one that is so inoffensive, so uneventful, it just does nothing. We have just 2 more episodes left in our push to the end of the Fox era. Haley wants to be a journalist and open people's eyes to the real stories of the world, something that will be played on later in one of the best episodes of American Dad ever made, Hot Scoop. And so she begins her journey to work on a brand new local news show with Genevieve Vance, and it's just Roger. The B story has Steve asking an anonymous question during sex ed, and when the teacher reads it aloud, she immediately recognizes his handwriting and he gets embarrassed in front of the whole class. There's also a callback to Merlot Down Dirty Shame in the same scene, where they remind us what a San Diego thank you is. Haley comes up with a plan to have Steve go missing so that she can piss a missing kid story to Roger so she can do her Garbage Island expose. However, Roger takes the story and runs with it, accusing Stan and Francine of taking their son out. We also get TJ Miller selling us on beer water, because you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him party. The Mamaris are in the background at a Steve vigil. I swear I do not remember them being around this long, and yet here they are. When Haley brings Roger to Steve throws Haley under the bus to ride the popularity of being a formerly missing kid, eventually leading to Haley exposing Roger in front of an audience and calling her out for sensationalizing the story. News Glance is a phenomenal episode that really wraps the whole family except Klaus into it. The jokes are sharp, Josh Groban makes a cameo, and as far as, I guess we could call this one of the last episodes of the Fox era, it feels like a solid send-off to a lot of characters. This would be the second to last episode of the full Fox era season, and I gotta say, News Glance is a 10 out of 10 that carries its weight and carries it all the way to the end. It's the last season finale of the Fox era. Haley is able to reach Jeff's spaceship and promises to wait for him no matter how long it takes, as he and the ghost of Sinbad struggle to find a way home. All this after Haley found a good man to take care of her and help her through her depression, played by the always delightful Pete Holmes. Haley is willing to try and make a long-distance relationship work. Meanwhile, Stan and Roger try and keep Matt, Haley's rich boyfriend, in the family by having Roger play Ramona and try and seduce him. Jeff and Sinbad manage to find a wormhole home to Earth, but when they get there, Haley has wasted her life waiting for him and the entire family has moved on as the house has fallen into disrepair. Jeff decides to go back in time through the wormhole and break up with Haley so that she stops waiting for him. I think the longest distance relationship is why I had such a problem with the previous season, ending on to Flippity Flop instead of Lost in Space. The episode feels like a season finale and almost in some ways a series one. It cuts the ties between Jeff and Haley that had been there since the very first episode of the entire show. Sure, I'm probably adding more weight to it than it needs, but the longest distance relationship is one of the strongest season finales yet, and it may be of all time. It's willing to call back on your feelings and your emotions of Jeff and Haley throughout the entire series. Look at how they've grown. Look at how they're entirely different people than the burnout stoners they were almost 200 episodes ago. This is truly a 10 out of 10 episode that really goes that extra mile in showcasing what makes American Dad so special. How many other shows have a season finale that not only calls back to, but also adds on to previous episodes? Not even finales at this point, as Lost in Space was the second to final episode of the last season. It's just the longest distance relationship is a poignant note to end the season on. And there we go. That's it. Not only is that season 9, but that's the last full season on Fox. While yes, there would be 3 episodes after this that I did mention earlier, and they do fit better in season 10 as a whole, and I'll be covering them when we open the chapter on the TBS era, season 9 just felt like a grab bag of quality. You had a lot of really solid episodes and some that just felt downright repetitive after a point. You could almost tell that they were starting to run out of steam at Fox, and though cancellation usually isn't viewed as a revitalization of a series, I think the move to TBS allowed the series to mature and develop itself for a much more niche audience. We've gone from a show that had episodes like Stan of Arabia and Camp Refugi, turned to one that has episodes like Minstrel Krampus and Rubberneckers. Gone are the days of biting political satire and cutaway gags. There's no Deacon Stan Jesus Man in these parts. American Dad of Season 9 is largely unrecognizable compared to its earlier season counterparts, and we have to remember the show had been on the air for almost a decade at this point, and this isn't even the true and proper halfway point of the show. This is just the end of an era. When we turn the page into Season 10, be on the lookout for the last breaths of that Fox spirit, and see how the show very subtly transforms. And, as we look at it, with Season 18 releasing at the time of this recording, who knows how many more of these videos I get to continue to make. I just want to thank you all so much for watching this far. Truly, all of your support and wonderful comments have kept inspiring me to push on further with this project. I am going to release an entire Fox era video, hopefully soon, which will just be all the previous seasons in one massive video, with some upgrades thrown in there. I've grown a little bit from Season 1, if you couldn't tell, and I plan on making sure that everything is up to that same universal quality. But anyway, what episodes did you like of Season 9? What episodes did you hate? Was I wrong on anything? Let me know in the comments below. And if you liked what you saw, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you all once again, and I have had a ton of fun making these videos, and I truly hope you've enjoyed them. But don't worry, I'll be back in no time when I start to cover Season 10. Good night, everybody.